There we go. All righty. Hello to those who are the early attendees just joining us. Thanks for hopping on the call tonight. We're just going to give it another few minutes here while we get ready and wait for others to join in, and then we'll start very shortly. And we do have the chat open here. So if you guys, as you're coming in, I know I'll probably repeat this in a minute, but as you're joining the call, if you want to type in the chat and maybe just introduce yourself, like who you are, if you're a developer or a neighborhood resident, something like that. Feel free to put whatever information you want. And do you have any other suggestions of what people?
Yes, put your zip code in where you live.
Yeah, your zip code and maybe whether you're a developer or resident, and then any other information. But yeah, just trying that out for this week. Feel free to type that in the chat as you join in. All right.
Where is it, Derek? I'll put go in it.
Yes, you should be able to click the chat button on the toolbar.
I found it. Okay.
Hold on, I have a couple people saying the chat is disabled. I thought I enabled it. Hold on. Oh, sorry about that. The chat should be open now for everybody, and I'm going to copy and paste yours. Yeah, the chat's open now, so if everybody who just joined in wants to type in a little, just brief little blurb about who they are, where they're from, what zip code, and that sort of thing. All right, so I'm sure as I go through my introduction here, people will be able to type more in the chat and just let us know who's in attendance tonight. But I think we're probably at a good point to get started, and I want to welcome everybody to tonight's Jumpstart Germantown JUMPinar. And this is our usually twice a month webinar series where we host speakers from the community and experts in the field and some community members and Jumpstart staff that we think can bring value to our discussion about real estate development and teaching people who live in our community how to rehab their homes and also providing financing to them with our loan program. So it's a variety of topics that we cover here on Wednesday nights, but tonight we're talking about a very important topic to us at Jumpstart and something that we haven't really been able to do a deep dive on, something we've touched on in probably nearly half of the other sessions that we've done with JUMPinars, but tonight we're talking about developing with the community in mind, and of course that's a huge responsibility of real estate developers to consider the communities that they're developing in. And joining us is a local Germantown resident, Anne Marie Doley, who will speak on this topic at great length with me and answer some of your questions later in about a half an hour or 45 minutes when we get to that. But I will quickly just let everybody know if you're unfamiliar, Jumpstart is a training and loan program based in Germantown. And we have several other Jumpstart training programs throughout the city. And we also have a loan program where we finance first-time projects and first-time developers who are looking for loans for their single-family rehabs or duplex rehabs. But our mission is blight removal and keeping wealth local and making sure that the right sorts of people are developing properties in the right way. And this is part of our extracurricular education that we have. Our JUMPinar series is held on Wednesday nights to talk in detail about things we don't cover during our normal training program. So thanks so much for coming tonight. And I see we got just about 15 people on the call, so thank you so much for joining us. Now I'll stop sharing my screen and pull up my introduction for our guest here, and then we'll get started with the conversation. Like I said, before I get started here, I just want to remind everybody that we will have a Q&A session at the end of our JUMPinar tonight. So probably around 7:45, we're going to switch over to taking your questions in the audience. So the way you'll do that is you can type them into the Q&A bar or the Q&A tab, which is on your Zoom toolbar there at the bottom. I'm going to disable the chat after I get started here. So everything will be through the Q&A throughout while Anna and I are talking, and then we'll get to all the questions at the end. And then we'll probably be wrapped up right around 8, or we can probably go a little bit longer if there's some outstanding questions as well. But yeah, I think that's everything for my intro, and I'll go ahead and introduce our guest here. So in the late 60s, Anne Marie Doley came to Philadelphia for college and never left. And in 1981, she moved from Powelton Village to Germantown to purchase a $24,000 row house. And back then, she worked in progressive philanthropy, helping start the Reinvestment Fund. And during the second half of her career, she taught language arts and social studies, as classroom teaching is her true passion. And since 2019, she's volunteered at the John Trower Project and with various campaigns. And her priority local causes are preventing displacement, preservation, ending gun violence, and community voice in development. And it's great to have her tonight, and I'll let her say hi herself. How's it going, Anne?
Oh, I'm okay. I'm just a little nervous.
Oh, don't be nervous at all.
Let me say a couple things. Hello to everybody who's here right now. I wanted to let you know that I'm not an expert. I think they called me an expert. I know very little about the technical aspects of development in terms of financing or variances or zoning or any of those types of things. I just speak from my experience living here for 40 some years and from being involved in various campaigns and issues in the neighborhood.
Great.
And I guess just to bring people current in terms of what I've done that is connected to this issue is that, well, the John Trower project involved, it's a very long, complicated story, but it had many parts over a number of years, but it involved winning a contest that another activists in the community, Yvonne Haskins and I spearheaded with Germantown United CDC. And we won a national contest where you vote online. It was really crazy, of over $100,000 grants to restore the facades of 2 historically Black properties in Germantown that had deteriorated. One is where the ACES Museum is, that building. And the other, I think it's called Powell Hall, but I might be saying it wrong. And the other is the John Trower House. And John Trower was a caterer, a very affluent caterer, a Black caterer, who died in 1911. So Germantown was always a mixed community and integrated community. But his house is now the Crab House on Germantown Avenue. However, we got it historically designated, so it can't be torn down, and there's a historic marker as of last fall there for him. So that was a great project around preservation of properties, not housing. And I've been involved in the campaign to restore the Germantown YWCA, which by Vernon Park on Germantown Avenue. And that building has been empty for a good 15 years and is a huge blight on the neighborhood. And we're trying to get that restored. Um, and people can get involved in that who want to. And also, I was involved with the community engagement on the former over 100 units of housing that was recently reclaimed from the Germantown settlement bankruptcy. So there's some of the housing things I've been involved
Yeah,
in.
that's awesome. Well, it sounds like you know the community well, and I'm excited to jump into the discussion here. Why don't we start where everybody's mind probably goes when they think about real estate development, and why do people in general, in the general sense, in communities like Germantown, dislike developers so much?
Well,
Um, I know that's a tough question to start with, but I feel
yes.
like it's a good place to start because that's where we have this conversation because of people get angry and dislike others. So.
Well, yes. And if you're on any Germantown social media, the vitriol and venom against developers is huge. And for all different reasons. And it reminded me of how people used to feel about lawyers or how they feel about used car salesmen. So if you think about that, you're thinking about people who lie to you,
Mhm,
people who only care about making money
mhm,
and they lack ethics. And that's a lot of how people feel towards developers because many developers are like that.
mhm,
Not all developers, but people have had very bad experiences.
mhm,
And also, there's a lot of fear in a neighborhood that's changing, which a lot of people call gentrifying.
mhm,
I don't generally use that term, but a neighborhood that's being revitalized after years of disinvestment, flight, business develop, disinvestment, job disinvestment, losing our schools, all of that. Um, so we're getting interest in our neighborhood. We're considered sort of desirable. Well, people are afraid because people view that as they're going to be pushed out. If
mhm,
they're homeowners, they're going to be pushed out because they can't afford the higher taxes or because predatory home buyers are after their house because it's in very poor condition. And
mhm,
so they're easy prey. And if they're a renter, they're afraid they're going to be pushed out because all the rents are going to go up, or some of the rental properties are going to be turned into other things.
mhm.
And all that is happening. And so that's a lot of where it comes from. It's based on fear, but it also is based on some very bad, actual, real experiences people have had with developers in our neighborhood.
Yeah, so it's a combination of, like sort of a fire is being lit under the people who live there, that there's outside forces coming in, and also, they're seeing bad things happen. So why would they have a pro stance on development, right? It seems kind of silly. It's like they're naturally kind of subjected to the bad decisions that developers make, right?
Yes, and people view, even though there are some developers who live in the neighborhood, and even though so many of the Jumpstart graduates are from the neighborhood or from the Northwest,
Hmm.
or a lot of women, a lot of people of color, um, getting into development, and it's infill development, not as destructive as, clear cutting development, you might want to call it.
Hmm.
And but people look at all the developers in general as outsiders.
Hmm.
And part of the reason people look at the developers as outsiders is because so many of the developers act like outsiders. They
Hmm.
don't get to know the community. They don't take an interest in the community. They don't learn about it. They don't get involved.
Hmm.
Um, they don't meet with the community unless they're forced to.
Hmm.
And that's because they want something. They want a variance.
Hmm.
Um,
So
and
let me ask you. You
yes,
said that there's people have real experiences and witness firsthand sort of the things that developers do that gives them that bad context of like what a developer is. What are some like direct and indirect ways that this happens? Like.
well, well, for one example, we had a historic house on Wayne Avenue torn down last year that
Mhm,
was the home of and studio of a famous artist. And the house got designated historically.
mhm,
So it was protected on the Philadelphia Register of Historic Places.
mhm,
However, the developer from Mount Airy, mind you, a neighbor, um, had, when they purchased the property, had immediately filed for demolition permits And on the technicality that he had filed for the demolition permit prior to the neighborhood, um, prior to the historic designation, it was a timing technicality. Um, it was ruled in his favor that he could demolish this historically certified building that
Hmm.
meant so much to all these people. Um, and the neighborhood got up petitions. They got, I think there were over 10,000 signatures on it. Tried to meet with him, tried to talk to, he was on a board in Mount Airy, tried to talk to those people. And it turned out he was very interested in historic preservation, but only in his neighborhood.
Hmm.
And it was like, oh, I can go down to Germantown, you know, that's a distressed community, and do what I want.
Hmm.
Because, and my opinion is, if you're a developer, you need, you shouldn't do anything you wouldn't do on your own block.
Hmm. Hmm. So
And
that example you just gave is like them just destroying a community asset, right?
yes, and
it's not a.
after the asset was destroyed, the guy got all the permits needed to build some huge building. I think I had most all the trees cut down. I'm not sure. I don't remember a lot of
Mhm.
details on some of these stories, and put it up for sale as shovel ready.
Mhm.
People don't like that.
Mhm. Yeah. So, I mean, that's a very direct way. That's like a you're walking down the street one day and you have this beautiful building you love, and the next day it's gone. What are some indirect ways that aren't so obvious? Is like, do you have any examples of that?
Um, of how developers have caused harm.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like things that maybe people are seeing in their communities that they
Well,
don't.
well, here's an example that there's these, and I forget the name of these apartments, but a friend of mine lives there, and they're on the corner of Johnson and Wayne, or Johnson and Green, and there's like five of them, and they look kind of like that British Tudor style. And there
Hmm.
are five buildings, and all of a sudden, and it's considered Germantown, even though it's on the border with Mount Airy. And
Hmm.
this happened this year. Well, at the end of last year into this year, all of a sudden, the owner who lives out in the suburbs somewhere decides he's tearing two of them down. And all these senior citizens live there. They're not, it's not affordable or low income housing, but these gorgeous apartments that had nothing wrong with them, he's tearing them down, and gave people notice, a very short notice of when they had to be out.
Hmm.
Now, they might have negotiated a little bit more time, but those buildings are gone now. People do not like demolition. Um, so somebody can, of something that's beautiful in this community, so people can build something new that wasn't really needed, just so they can make a lot of money and
Hmm.
displace people in the process.
Hmm. Yeah. So just kind of like uh, abstract decisions that get made that don't really have any meaning or value behind them. But it's like it's causing harm to the people who live there, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit more about housing. And you mentioned there that these homes weren't affordable or and they weren't market rate housing, but they were beautiful homes. What are we seeing happen with affordable and market rate homes in Germantown and the city as a whole?
Well, in Philadelphia, there's been a shortage of low income and affordable housing for decades, for years, and it just keeps getting worse. I think the the list for public housing, and maybe the list for even what's called Section 8, but the Housing Choice Voucher Program housing, some of those lists are for like 5 and 10 year waiting lists. It's
Right,
crazy.
right.
Um, and so there's a terrible shortage, and very few private developers want to get involved in that housing. And now some of the housing like that existed, I don't know how many people follow everything in the news, but there's been these sit-ins and this huge battle going on over by Penn and Drexel,
Hmm.
called the
You,
University City Townhouses.
yeah, I used to live right at 40th and Market there, so I'm very familiar. Yeah.
Yes, and so what that was Penn and Drexel. I'm an ashamed alumni of,
Same here.
of one of those schools, the other one, and they scooped up all the surrounding neighborhoods years ago to expand, and so at a certain point, had those houses built, but they don't own them. Some private person owns them and leases them to HUD or something like that. So all of a sudden, this guy decides, oh, I bet you I can make more money doing something else with this property and
Hmm.
these places. So all the people were given eviction notices.
Hmm.
And that's what the protest is that's going on. And
Hmm.
I mean, how many times are you going to move the most vulnerable people to somewhere else?
Yeah. So there's a huge disconnect between what types of housing is being built and destroyed versus what is actually needed by the community, right? Um,
Yes, even though there are some positive things happening, but I think you maybe wanted to ask me that later. But
yeah, yeah. We'll certainly get into the positive things. We
I can
need to
talk
balance it
about
out.
it when you want me to.
Yeah, so why don't we talk a little bit more about like the state of housing, and so if you want to bring up some positive aspects of what's being done right now, that's totally fine. But in terms of like for a developer, especially one coming out of the Jumpstart program, they're looking at, okay, I'm gonna make my first investment on a rehab project, and it's either gonna be a house they're gonna sell to a family or a rental. What is the availability like for those types of housing, between rentals and single family
well,
homes?
well, most of what's getting built in Germantown right now, forget about the publicly owned properties.
Hmm.
Okay, for a second, like
Hmm.
the YWCA or the um, the town hall in Germantown or these reclaimed 100 some units from Germantown settlement,
Hmm.
which some developers could bid on some of those. Um, what's getting built are mostly very large multi-family, multi-unit, I don't know the correct term, apartment buildings,
High density housing.
high density. And people don't hate all of that, especially when it's near the transit areas, the trains, when it really is. But they don't like it for some reasons. And I live on a block right now. I live on Germantown Avenue, and I live on a block where it's being built all around me. And people dislike it for two main reasons, three, maybe four or five. They dislike it because frequently it's very ugly,
Hmm.
in their opinion, and doesn't fit in with the historic character of the neighborhood.
Hmm.
And now, fortunately, on the block I am, the one that's three doors down from me and the one across the street, um, are being built with the aesthetics of the neighborhood in mind.
Hmm.
Okay,
Hmm.
but not with the issue of parking in mind. So the one three doors down from me with 40 units has zero parking.
Hmm.
And the one across the street, which is probably going to have around 40 units also, or 38 or something, is going to have zero parking. And then there's one down at the corner and one around the corner. So they're all over.
Hmm.
But I'm just telling you the ones right by me. And what happens then is these developers say, oh, well, people will move in and, they won't have cars. They're into transit and the whole environmental thing and decreasing the dependence on the car. But in fact, half the people will have cars. And then they'll take up the spots that the other residents around here used.
Hmm.
I'm partially disabled. I can't even keep my car here anymore because I can never count on
Hmm.
getting a parking spot.
Yeah. So there is, high density and somewhat affordable housing being developed, but it's being kind of implemented in inefficient way, right? Is that what you're
No,
saying?
it's not affordable either.
Oh, it's not affordable either. Okay.
No,
Gotcha.
it's not affordable to the majority of renters who currently live in the neighborhood.
Hmm.
Now, um, I live in a building that is affordable. I'm very lucky, but and there were two people who lived in here, a couple that moved into the new building. So maybe like young couples could afford it, two income, no kids. But most of these buildings they're building are only one, they're very small units for the most part. Most all one bedroom, a few two bedroom, usually nothing bigger than that.
Hmm.
That's one thing. And then I went to the zoning meeting for the one that's going to be down at Washington Lane and Germantown Avenue and the former Comer's paper company site.
Mhm.
And those apartments would cost 80% of my income to rent. Now, here it's close to 50, but that would be 80. I'm on fixed income. So, and I have higher Social Security than many people in this neighborhood.
Mhm.
So they're not being built with a mix of affordable units. That's so rare. And so
Mhm.
not only do the people feel, okay, all these new people are coming, I can't afford to live in these places. I might lose my place because my rent will go up too.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I have nowhere to park if I own a house.
Right. Right. So it becomes a bigger issue than just one thing. You know, it's like they could compound on top of each other, and when it's really bad, it becomes really bad. Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. I would
So.
say there's constants around the parking, around the issue of aesthetics,
Mhm.
and around the fact that people are not making mixed income buildings,
Mhm. Mhm.
particularly in these large buildings where they could make a small percent of the
Mhm.
units more affordable, and they don't.
Yeah, so and I do want to ask you about that strategy later. But for so we've covered kind of what the current state of housing is and what the issue is and why people hate or dislike developers. But like the where jump starters are, they're at a position to then go forth and do what these people are saying they hate so much. So well now I kind of want to shift the conversation to like how can we make sure that rehabs that are jump starters are doing are beneficial to the most amount of people possible. So what aspects of a rehab, and I know you've touched on them up to this point, but what aspects of a rehab project, so you know buying a blighted property and rehabbing it, make it beneficial to more people? Obviously, affordability is one.
Yes, and but most people don't um, would not object um, to someone building houses that even are expensive. If
Mhm.
if if those developers, I can think of two or three different projects right now, of whom two of the developers, no, all of the developers I think are local, where the projects are aesthetic, where there's not these big problems about parking, where the developers meet with the residents, where they're respectful, where they're not blocking your streets with dumpsters and trash spilling over the whole time they're doing the construction, where they pay attention to preserving trees and some green space. People don't expect everything to have affordable housing in it and everything to um, have a lot of parking.
Mhm.
So there are people who, and I know one of these people is a Jumpstart graduate that I'm thinking of right now. Um, he's built houses in the neighborhood that they're expensive, but it's an individual house or two houses at the most. Um, it's not a building with 40 apartments in it.
Mhm. And it's diversifying where the higher properties values are, right? So it's not all in one corner on a one spot or one block.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. And this same person, is involved in the community. They're active in the as a volunteer in the group to get the Y redeveloped.
right. So affordability isn't the all be all of responsible development, right? It's
No, no.
and I think that's a notion that a lot of people have, you know, um because that's kind of the hot button issue that everybody talks about.
But you know what is, um, because you can't stop housing prices from going up or rents from going up. Um, but what is the end all be all is to get to know, to be a good neighbor, to respect the
Right.
community. That's the
Right.
end all be all.
Right. So yeah, now let's talk about that. What can a developer do in order to earn their community's support and earn their respect?
Well, I would say that developers need to get to know the neighborhood. They need to know the demographics of the neighborhood if they're not from here.
Mhm.
They need to know the history of the neighborhood. This neighborhood has an incredible history that goes back to the 1600s. It
Mhm.
has a history with opposing slavery in the United States before the United States existed. I
Mhm.
mean, we have an Underground Railroad site on my block. A Revolutionary battle happened catty corner. I can see it from my window that the
Mhm.
Americans lose every year when it gets reenacted. But you learn about the neighborhood and then you learn to love it and understand it the way the people who live here love it and understand it and want to protect it.
Mhm. Yeah. And you know, you touched on a lot of those things beyond just so like aesthetics, traffic, and parking issues and green space trees. So like like doing enough research so that when you're deciding to incorporate one of those things, you know if it's going to be successful or not. You're not just
And you
picking it.
also don't do things like go off on a small side street or side streets that really are not near transit. They're a mile away or more, and build dense housing sideways down a lot where the properties aren't even going to face the street and
Mhm.
things like that. Things like that really upset people.
Mhm.
Um, and and have no parking for those people either.
Mhm.
And you meet with the community before you make up your mind about everything, so it doesn't become adversarial. And you
Mhm.
meet with the community even when you don't need a variance,
Mhm.
out of good faith and respect, to let people know what you're thinking about doing and to hear their thoughts and get feedback. And
Mhm.
it's really important not to wait till you have it all mapped out and all the blueprints and everything done, so that when people say, geez, um, that just doesn't fit in here at all. It doesn't become a battle, and you haven't spent all this money, and you're then resistant to change anything.
Mhm. Yeah, gotcha. So, moving on, I guess we sort of touched on this before, but I want to ask you more about the that lack of trust between real estate developers and those that live in a changing neighborhood. What ways are local residents, especially longtime residents, people who've lived in their homes for many years, how are they preyed upon, and sort of what do bad developers do to like prey upon them and sort of take advantage of their
Okay.
financial
But,
invulnerability?
but I want to say that people in low income neighborhoods, and we are a low income neighborhood and a
Mhm.
majority Black community, we were preyed upon before this whole gentrification thing happened. We've been preyed upon from 1980 and
Mhm.
1970. And so what happens is, and not just by developers, but also by real estate people and um, people buying buildings to turn them into uh, a kind of economy in our community that our neighborhood became an economy of subsidized institutions. Do you know what I'm speaking about? Um, of halfway houses and um, prison deferral programs and methadone clinics and drug treatment and sex offender halfway house and mentally challenged halfway house. And our neighborhood, including the block where my house is, um, became so inundated with all of these institutions. That's not healthy for a neighborhood either. I'm
Mhm.
not saying those programs aren't needed, but they shouldn't all be in one neighborhood. And neighborhoods that are more stable and less desperate. Um, and also, we had a lot of old buildings that were empty and could be bought cheap. So we there was this institutionalization that went on of our neighborhood, shelters for youth, shelters for abused women, all these things. These are not all bad things per se, but they shouldn't all be bunched up in one neighborhood or a part of one neighborhood or certain sections of one neighborhood, because then they pull the neighborhood down.
Mhm.
Um, and that's a complicated story. And I'm not telling that in any way to speak ill will of people that have certain needs or problems.
Mhm.
I'm just saying that a neighborhood like Chestnut Hill is what you call a stable neighborhood because they have the money, they have the time, they have the resources, they have the lawyers. so they can have what they want in their neighborhood. But a neighborhood like Germantown that got on hard times because of white flight and racism and fear mongering starting in the 50s,
Hmm.
um, and, went full throttle up until the 70s,
Hmm.
went through a massive 2-decade total switch in population.
Hmm.
And that kind of instability is very harmful to a neighborhood. And then afterwards, the people who are in the neighborhood get preyed upon. I,
Hmm.
it's a complicated story, but it's it's cyclical. So it's not just when we're coming up and people want to come back and reinvest in us.
Hmm.
You've been exploited for years.
Yeah, yeah. So it's not just that people are have lived here a long time and now are in this development that's going through change. It had already gone through change, right? And they've already gone through the gamut, and now they're kind of just being put back into that cycle, right? Um,
Another form of it in different ways.
mhm,
So for instance, we had a large, and sometimes it's internal to the community itself. We had a large nonprofit called Germantown Settlement, which I think started out okay, but it eventually got too big or too corrupt, or people got, I don't know what happened, but they were the biggest employer, the biggest realtor, and the biggest housing developer in our neighborhood, and they went bankrupt. And that's why the Y is empty.
mhm,
That's why all these houses just got reclaimed. And that's why we have a lot of blight, because that even happened internally in our neighborhood. It doesn't always come from outside, but
mhm,
frequently it's in partnership with outside people. For instance, the city kept enabling, city agencies and politicians kept enabling that organization, kept throwing more money at them when there were thousands of red flags.
mhm,
And they bought the Y back in 2006 or something, I think, and the Y never opened. You
mhm,
know, and they got $1 million from the city, 1.3 million to buy the city, and that building never opened. The city never got a dime back. That was the redevelopment authority then. And
mhm,
we're still trying to get the Y redeveloped now, you know, and it's been had 3 fires and it's
mhm.
very damaged, and all this kind of inefficiency and ineptness in the city itself too, um, hurts neighborhoods like this.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Okay. So I want to make sure we can get through all what we have planned here. So I'm going to move on to the next question. It's sort of just about the specific construction phase of a rehab project. How can jump starters interact with the neighborhoods during that? So like, what sort of things should they keep in mind about their construction site and how the neighbors are going to be
I
interacting
don't really think there's too much to say about that. That's real common sense.
with them?
That has to do
You'd be
with
surprised.
dumpsters and trucks and all kinds of issues around safety and traffic.
Mhm.
Um, and that, you're supposed to be a good neighbor, and you let people know when you're turning the water off because of your project, or when this is going to happen.
Mhm.
You don't just act like you're some stranger doing this stuff to a neighborhood.
Mhm.
I mean, I call that predatory developing, um, or extraction. You come into a neighborhood, you're you're going to build stuff and get as much money out of it as you can,
Mhm.
without having anything to do with the people who live there, or what their concerns are, or what their needs are.
Hmm. Yeah, so you should be doing it for the neighborhood, right? Not to the neighborhood. Uh,
Exactly.
I like that. And yeah, and again, just common courtesies, right? So like cleaning up trash and noise to a reasonable degree and stuff like that. Mhm.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Now, moving on, I also want to talk about zoning. And you had a really great quote during our prep session, which was zoning is in Philly is viewed as pro demolition and pro developer, which I think is very true. And can you kind of explain what you mean by that, and then talk about how?
Well, yeah, very briefly. By right zoning, and I know there's a lot of differences of opinion on that. Lets people do anything they want within what the zoning of that spot is.
Mhm.
Okay. And the fact is, the city has been revamping its zoning in that plan 35, 2035, that they started in 2011, and it's not finished yet. So things happen very slowly in this city. So a lot of Germantown isn't zoned right. Some of it's zoned in crazy ways. Um, and um, Sometimes people need a variance. Now, and what they're supposed to, if they need a variance, have a financial hardship should be the reason. But people want variances for all kinds of reasons because they want to put more in a space than the zoning says is allowed, or because the
Hmm.
zoning maybe isn't current, and it just says commercial. Like where Comer's Papers was, it said it was zoned for auto manufacturing or something, and it was Comer's Paper for years. Well, these people want to put in housing, um, and they had to get a variance.
Hmm.
And the thing is, and some part of Germantown is Avenue is going to require commercial on the first floor because that's a desired thing for the walkability of our business corridor. I don't think that has even passed city council yet, but that's what's going in there.
Hmm.
So you'd have to get a variance if you don't want it commercial on the first floor.
Hmm.
Um, but frequently people ask for variances because they're being greedy and they just want to crowd up the space and use up every inch of green space. Um, I don't know. I think that it would behoove developers to try to do what the zoning says for that space, unless there's some small modification they want to make. Um, Maybe it was a zone for a single house and they want to put a twin houses on it or something like that. I don't really know.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, and then I guess going back to what you said earlier, like you want to make sure that the community is involved. If there is a decision to be made, you need to have the community's voice behind it and make sure that before you make that decision, you talk to them about, oh, maybe it's this weird zoning and this weird mismatch of zoning for a reason because that's what works, right?
yeah. But some of it is outdated and wrong, and because it's so slow getting it corrected and getting it more uniform. And
Mhm.
anyway, that's just one thing. And the thing is also that less than, I think, 2% of the, uh-oh, can you see me still?
Yep, I can see it still. No worries.
Less than 2% of the properties, the built properties or historic properties, I don't know the exact figures, in Philadelphia are protected. And
Hmm.
so there's this feverish effort right now to get more of the historic properties protected here and in other parts of the city, because they can be demolished.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay. And my last two or three points here that I want to make, and then we'll move on to the listener Q&A. So be sure to, if you have any questions for Anne, type them in the Q&A now, and we'll get to them in a few minutes here. But so there was something you mentioned earlier about like making a percentage or a portion of your housing affordable as
Yeah,
a way to kind of
yes. There's
counteract the increase in property values and rents.
Yeah,
Um,
yes. There's people that a lot of developers think that all of the affordable and low income housing should mostly be done by government agencies because they can do it more in scale, right? But a lot of people disagree with that, and I'm one of them. And some examples of that are in West Philadelphia in Jamie Gauthier's councilmanic district, and in Kensington, Councilwoman Maria Quinones Sanchez. Those two got these overlays made for their districts, where anything that has 10 or more units has to be 20% affordable. And
wow.
if you don't do that, you have to contribute to the housing trust fund that the city has that goes to support low income housing, construction, repairs, and all kinds of things like that.
You're saying even without a zoning overlay or a district overlay or something like that, that's something that a developer could kind of just set as a standard, right?
Yes, and there's other things developers can do where they get these credits for doing some low income housing. I can give you this for the notes.
Yeah.
to send out to people afterwards. But there's other things like when developers want to go higher, wider, um, and maybe have more density, um, they can get permission to do some of these things from another policy the city has.
Okay.
But people could do this on their own. And there are some people who say they're going to do it in Germantown with the town hall that may be getting developed. And if people look in the Plan Philly from August 17th, there's two developers doing this to a historic building and a warehouse, an old bank. They're going to do this in Kensington, and they say it's a third way, and it's where you have essentially mixed income housing,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
that's what a
Within
neighborhood
a
should.
within a multi-unit building, you mean?
Yes, and that's what a neighborhood should be, mixed income,
Hmm.
and that's what can make a neighborhood strong. I mean, it shouldn't just be all poor people or all rich people,
Hmm.
that kind of situation, and so people could do that, but they'd have to, just like providing some parking, um, they'd have to sacrifice not money being the main thing, they every cent they can get out of that property,
Hmm.
because it would lower your profits.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so I had wanted to mention that thing you had said about Jumpstart having three bottom line, or
The
what,
triple bottom line, yeah.
yes, you said it was people, the environment, and the profit making
The sale. Yeah.
of the sale. And so I think it should be all those things, and that's like responsible development.
Hmm.
And that's what we need here and throughout the city. Um,
Absolutely.
so
Okay, great. And the last thing I wanted to ask you about, and then we'll jump into, there's a question or two in the Q&A right now, and then if anybody else has others, they can submit them while we wrap up here. But just as a last key point, trees, landscaping, and property maintenance. What does that mean for a property, and how does like a rundown, dirty yard, what does that signify to the community about that project?
yeah, and yes, people really care about that. And I think it's because we're a very green community
Hmm.
historically, and we have all these parks, and we're by the Wissahickon.
Hmm.
People move here for a reason, and they don't want to see it all become cement.
Hmm.
And for instance, a new building has recently been built on Wayne Avenue, and I won't say anything about the developer or name them, but it's universally been booed by the neighborhood as being an ugly building. And besides the fact that the building doesn't fit in, there's no like street trees there, just some very small containers with some little bushes or plants in them
Hmm.
that are totally overpowered by the structure. And I think there might be a courtyard somewhere behind that the community can't see for the residents. But what the community sees is very unattractive.
Hmm.
And I personally think that's disrespectful.
Hmm.
Um, so people want green space maintained, and um, trees maintained where possible. And if not, replaced by street trees, that kind of thing.
Hmm. Okay, great. Sounds good. And I think that's the everything I got on our discussion outline here. So you did want to mention that there were some articles you wanted to send out. Do you want to just briefly touch on what those will be so people can look out for them?
Well, I'll give you the links, and well, I was going to put something in about the university townhouses, about any of the new city programs that are connected to low income housing or low
Oh,
income tax credits,
great.
um, some of that.
Okay, great. Yeah, so we'll look out for that, and
And
everybody.
people should pay attention to when the requests for proposals come out for the Germantown settlement properties, because that's like at least 25 different properties with over 100 and some units. So there's going to be an effort to have some be um, first-time home buyer properties,
Hmm.
um, and all affordable. And that's going to be a subsidized project.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And that are available for like private developers to get involved in, what you mean?
Yes.
Oh, cool. Cool. Okay, yeah, we'd love to have that information if you want to include that in the links that we'll send out. Yeah. Um, so yeah, the listener question we have here, and if others have them, they can type them in while we wrap things up. It comes from Keith Brooks, and he is wondering he's stating developers build in response to trends and tenant demands. And if tenants are seeking luxury apartments with endless amenities, can some of the affordability challenges that exist be attributed to tenant wants and not solely on developers seeking to make a profit? That's a hard question.
Well,
um,
the question is, who are these tenants? I mean, we've been told all over on the news and in Philly and nationwide that there's a housing shortage
mhm,
in the US. But most everything except for the infill development that's happening in Germantown that's being built is almost the same.
mhm,
And they're very small apartments that are not affordable to most people who live there. And so, therefore, new people coming here from New York or the suburbs, or maybe a few people in the neighborhood who are downsizing, or
mhm,
young couples or something that can afford it.
mhm,
But they're not for the people who live here. So there's this fear in Germantown, and I don't know how real it is, that in a few years, all these places aren't going to be occupied.
mhm,
And, a lot of people tried to sneak in to get their 10-year tax abatement before that expired,
mhm,
um, which is another pro developer thing that Philly had, which is understandable, a poor city trying to increase its tax base. But,
mhm,
um, people are worried. Some people say some of these places aren't all occupied now and
mhm,
are having high turnovers. And there's the issue of who's managing these buildings when these people from the suburbs or even out of state are building them. And are they being managed well? Because you said, after the place gets built, well, then there needs to be good management too.
mhm. Yeah. So it's sort of like there's a problem with short-term desires, right? Like what but tenants are going to want in the short term is different than what is going to bring value to a community in the long term, right? So,
Well, and who are these tenants? And I don't know. It's hard for me to answer that question. To me, most of those places that are being built like that, I can't say all of them
mhm,
because I don't really know, um, are not being built for people who live here.
mhm, sure. Okay. All right. Well, there's not any other questions in the chat there, so I think that wraps up our discussion tonight. Is there any closing points you wanted to add, Anne, before we close out tonight?
No, unless anybody has anything else they'd like to ask.
All right. Well, I'll keep an eye.
I thank everybody for coming.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody, tonight, and I'll keep an eye on the Q&A just in case there's any that come in here as we wrap up. But the recording of our conversation tonight, me and Ann here, is going to be available on our website at jumpstartgermantown.com/library. So probably by tomorrow or the next day, I'll have the Zoom recording posted
Oh,
there.
yeah, I did actually have something.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
This is very bold of me.
Oh.
But I wanted to suggest that people who live in Germantown or are involved with Germantown development or live in Mount Airy or the Northwest should, like any business, be active in the community. And I was thinking that there's all kinds of ways. We don't even have a business association in Germantown anymore. Um, that's how weak some of our infrastructure is, and sort of
Mhm,
how damaged we were from the disinvestment of the businesses that all left Germantown.
mhm,
We have some little small things like on Wayne Avenue, a small one on, or a fledgling one on Maplewood Mall. And the 6300 block where I live has a good business association, but that's counted as part of Mount Airy. And that's a territorial dispute.
mhm,
So Germantown doesn't have a business association. We have a very small, not real affluent community development corporation. And I should say, in full disclosure, my daughter is the director of it. And they could use people to be involved on their board, on committees, to help get out all the information to the financially stressed homeowners.
Yeah.
Um, about all the resources available that can help them keep their homes. That's a critical thing to keep Germantown from totally changing, is to help those people keep their homes. Anyone who's financially stressed. From tax.
Yes. And do you have like places we could point people to?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So
And they,
maybe in the information that you send to me to follow up with everybody, we can include that, like a website or link somewhere people can go.
yes,
Okay,
yes.
great.
So did we use up all the time? Yes.
Yeah. Well, so I have one good I have a question here from a listener, and this is a good one. And then we'll close it out on that for tonight. But William was wondering, what would you ask a developer that was interested in the needs of the area and offered to donate to a community project? And he's wondering, are they trading funds for an approval? They're in an area that is being damaged by development, and developers are offering donations to community
Well,
projects.
yeah, there are community benefits agreements that have been made, and they can be very helpful.
Hmm.
Um, and um, and there's groups that you can donate to, like the groups that do the there's three groups: Face to Face Germantown, Germantown United CDC, and Center in the Park, which is a senior center that do all the housing counseling to people who are in danger of losing their home for one reason or another, or who need these loans. And so supporting those groups could be something.
Yeah.
Supporting a campaign that would put out literature, either it distributed door to door or by zip code to all the houses, to give people the information of where they can get help.
Hmm.
That would be an incredible thing.
Right, right. And that's just, and like obviously that's not doing things like that, or maybe donations on top of your investment in the neighborhood or whatever, that can't be a bad thing, right? And it
No,
certainly can't be a bad thing to just want to spread the message, right? And let people know
no,
how they can
because
get help if they.
we all need to be good neighbors to each other. I mean, that's why I wrote a brochure on resources to help people that were in danger of losing their homes, and that still exists. We just had a hard time getting it distributed all over the neighborhood. So I'm not an affluent person, but I want to help people who are worse off than me. I think we're talking about the common good and the
Sure.
collective well-being of the community
Mhm.
now and in its future, not just looking out for ourselves.
Great. I think that's a great place to end on, Anne. That was a great quote to finish things up.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Anna. Really appreciate you taking the time tonight to talk with us. And I'm looking forward to seeing the resources that you give me to send out to everybody, and I'll make sure that
And
they.
I thank everybody for coming and staying and for your questions. And I hope it was beneficial.
Yeah, it definitely was. Thank you so much, Anne.
You're welcome.
All right. Have a good night.
Bye.